The autumn of 1902, a woman crawls through her own yard on her hands and knees in the mud, laying lengths of hollow clay pipe end to end, in a trench. So cold the walls shine like iron, her neighbors stop. Their wagons on the road to stare, some call out, some just shake their heads. Marta Solberg is 31 years old, Hungarian by birth, and she has arrived in Dakota territory with a memory, a living daughter, and a knowledge passed down from her grandmother that nobody on this flat prairie has believed. She is burying clay pipe 16 inches down in a serpentine loop that runs from beneath her cabin. It runs all the way out to the open field 40 feet north, where the wind comes from. According to everything her neighbors understand, there is nothing useful to be found, no spring, no coal. Seam Lars Hendrickson leans on his fence post, arms crossed over his sheepskin coat, calling across the brown grass, "Marta, what in God's name are you dragging pipe?" For she looks up once, brushes mud from her chin. She goes back to laying the next section. Lars turns to his wife, Berta, standing beside him. She's gone soft in the head. He says, "Grief does it, I reckon best leave her to it down the road." Old Gunnar Svensson drives his team past 3 mornings in a row, watching the trench grow. He watches Marta's small form crouched in it, with a mattock and bare determination. On the 3rd morning, Marta Solberg, he bellows, "You're digging toward the Pedersen claim. You ain't gonna find warmth in Pedersen's field." He chuckles to himself all the way into town and tells the story at the feed store for days. What none of them know is that Marta's grandmother kept livestock alive through Hungarian winters that freeze men. She understood something simple and ancient and true: the ground deep enough never freezes. It holds its temperature in midwinter 16 inches down. The earth sits at a steady 38 to 42 degrees cold. But warm, it is warm beyond imagining compared to the air above it, which will reach 50 degrees below zero. Marta knows this, and she is going to use it. She comes to Dakota from New York in 1897. She and her husband Istvan have $40 sewn into a coat and a land grant for 160 acres. Istvan is a strong man who builds their cabin in the first autumn with a sod roof and hearth. It is a decent cabin, timber frame with mud-chinked walls, good enough for a mild winter. Dakota is not the winter of 1898. Kills him slowly the way those winters kill homesteaders who don't understand the cold. The cabin cannot hold heat. The chinking cracks, the wind finds every gap. Istvan works in 37 below. He comes inside to a room that sits at 20 below on bad nights. By February, he has coughs. By March, it is in his lungs deep. He dies on April 2nd, the morning after the last frost. Marta buries him on the claim. She has 4-year-old Anna to think about, and a mortgage of $230. She has no family within 4,000 miles. She has the memory of her grandmother's voice. She stays. She works the claim through 1899 and 1900, hiring a neighbor boy for field work, raising winter wheat and chickens. She is not prospering. She is surviving. The cabin defeats her every winter. She burns wood faster than cutting. She sleeps in every piece of clothing she owns. Little Anna develops the same cough that killed Istvan in the winter of 1901. Marta sits up 3 nights by the child's bed listening to that wet rasp. The cough passes. Anna recovers. But Marta has made a decision. She writes to her cousin in Budapest. Her cousin Erzsébet writes back 4 pages describing the technique their grandmother uses in the stone barn, how she runs hollow pipes from beneath the barn floor out into the open field for steady warmth, how the livestock never shivers and never sickens. Even when the temperature outside would freeze a man's breath. Marta reads that letter 4 times. Then she goes to town and buys every length of clay drainage pipe, 4 to 3 pieces at 8 cents a piece, representing most of what she saves that season. She borrows a mattock. The trench runs 4 to 2 feet north from the cabin's foundation, curving once like a long arm reaching out. She digs it 16 inches deep. The topsoil comes up hard and pale, the color of old biscuit. Below 8 inches, it softens and becomes darker, carrying a faint smell of something alive, and patient the work takes. 9 days she lays the pipes end to end, each one fitted carefully. To next, the joints are packed with mortar she mixes from clay subsoil and lime. The fit is not perfect. She compensates by wrapping each joint with strips of burlap soaked in clay mortar, pressing river stones for alignment. The pipe enters the cabin through the foundation opening into a shallow pit. She digs in the floor a cavity 3 feet square and 8 inches deep, lined with flat stones hauled from the creek bed. Over this stone-lined pit, She lays a second plank floor, leaving a 2-inch air gap between the planks the cavity traps. The air rising from the pipe allowing it to circulate and bleed warmth through the gaps. It is not a stove, it generates no fire, it requires no fuel, it brings the earth's latent warmth, the principle is. Older than anyone knows builders in Persia. Use it, the Romans call it a hypocaust, the earth below the frost line. Maintains a temperature of 40 degrees year-round, as stable as a clock, air moving through a buried pipe picks up warmth. By the time it surfaces, it carries free heat. Marta's 40-watt run is long enough to extract warmth. She angles it with a slight upward slope. This encourages natural convection, a slow, continuous breath through the system without any pump or human effort. She seals the far end of the pipe with a cap fashioned from a flat stone and mortar, leaving a small gap at the bottom no wider than 2 fingers that faces south away from wind. Cold outside air enters, travels 4 to 2 feet through earth that never freezes, and arrives at the floor tempered reliably. Stubbornly 40 degrees and 40 degrees, pressing up through a floor changes everything for a small stove. The problem on the 7th day is that the pipe entering the foundation cracks under the stone footing. A 6-inch section splits longitudinally. She sits back on her heels and stares at it. With no money, she has no horse to ride to town, and no time. The weather shows the flat gray sky. She repairs it. She mixes a thick paste of clay subsoil and wood ash, packing it with fingers. Her hands are gray to the wrist. She wraps the repair in burlap and heats water for steam. She leaves it overnight by the stove and tests it in the morning by pressing with all her force. It holds. She lays it back in the trench on the 9th day. She covers the pipe with soil. She tamps it down with the flat of the mattock, and it disappears under the plane as if gone. Gunnar Svensson drives his wagon past a final time and sees only a filled trench, and a woman gave up on it. Did she? He remarks to no one and drives on. Berta Hendrickson comes by. Berta stands in the doorway, pressing her lips together. Marta, you have cut a hole in your floor. I have. Marta agrees. You'll freeze the child. I won't, Marta says, setting flat stones into the cavity. Berta goes home and tells Lars, and they agree that grief has done something permanent to Marta's reasoning. What none of them see is the interior. That evening, when Marta lights a lamp and sits down, she places her bare hand flat on the new boards. They are not warm yet. Airflow needs days, but she can feel something she has not felt since summer. The boards are not cold. She has no thermometer. She has her hand, her body, and the testimony of her own bones. By the 1st week of December, she is going to bed wearing fewer clothes. The condensation is gone. The wall is still cold, but the floor is not, and the floor is where a person lives. She buys a mercury thermometer in March and begins keeping records in a small notebook with marbled covers. Every morning and evening, she records the temperature inside, outside, and the air rising from the pipe cavity. She shows these records to no one. They are for herself. The winter of 1903 comes early. The temperature drops to 22 below zero and stays there. A high-pressure system settles like a lid for 3 weeks. The temperature does not rise above 10 below. At night, it reaches 34 below. The snow comes dry and fine as powdered glass, driven by a 40-mile wind that finds every gap. Marta's cabin holds. The floor reads 61 degrees outside. It is 31 below zero. 92 degrees of difference between the earth under her boards and the air beyond her door. The room averages 43 degrees on the coldest nights, a temperature in which a person does not die. Little Anna stops, coughing across the road. Lars Hendrickson burns through his wood supply. By January, Lars goes gray around the mouth. His cabin holds an interior temperature of 22 degrees. Lars wears his coat to bed. His children sleep 3-2. A cot for the warmth of bodies. Gunnar Svensson does worse. His cabin is older. His water barrel freezes solid 18 inches from the stove. Marta's water barrel does not freeze. And then February comes. The blizzard of 1904 is the worst. The sky goes greenish-white to the northwest, a color like milk, held up to a sick light. By midnight, it sits at 51 below zero. With a wind a human body cannot survive for minutes. It lasts 4 days. The sound is the world deciding it no longer needs you. A constant note. The lamp flickers, the stovepipe rattles, the cabin pops and shifts like a ship in a sea. Marta sits with Anna, who is 6 years old. They have food, the stove, and the floor. They play cards on the second afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the floor, because it is the warmest place. Anna presses her palms flat to the boards. Mama, the floor is warm. Marta deals the cards on the first night. Marta writes in her notebook, floor surface 59 degrees, room temperature 39 degrees. She underlines the 9-degree difference twice on the second day. She hears something from outside. It is the neighbor's sod barn. The roof supports are giving way under the weight of accumulated snow. Lars Hendrickson loses the east section of his barn roof. He goes out and gets frostbite on fingers. 3 of his pigs die. The family on the Pedersen claim loses their cabin entirely as it collapses the marsh. Couple makes it to the Hendrickson cabin. 9 people huddle around a stove at 24 degrees. Marta's room measures 37 degrees. She is wearing a coat, and Anna's cheeks are pink on the third night. A crack forms in the east wall. Marta packs it with rags and ash. Without the steady 4-degree air rising from the pipe, she knows it would not be enough. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind drops suddenly. The sky is clearing from the west. Marta opens her door and looks at drifts 8 feet high, sculpted into architectural shapes by the wind. She and Anna dig out her 2 milk cows. Survive because she built the barn floor. Similarly, Lars Hendrickson appears at her fence line. His left hand is wrapped in cloth. He looks tired. How cold did it get inside? He asks. 37 on the worst night. Marta says. He stares at her. We were at 24. My Berta's hands are bad. She can't hold a cup. Marta feels grief for Berta's hands. The pipe under the floor. Lars says, show me. She shows him, explaining the depth and the serpentine path. Lars listens with his hat in hands. Berta Hendrickson comes 2 days later, her hands wrapped, sitting in Marta's cabin, holding hands toward floor. It's warm. Berta says, I'm sorry for telling Lars you'd gone soft in the head. Gunnar Svensson comes in March. He stands in the doorway and looks at the floor and stove. I told folks you'd lost your reasoning. I was mistaken. He looks at the thermometer readings. By gum, he says quietly, that spring Lars Hendrickson rebuilds his barn floor with buried pipe. Gunnar pays Marta $10 to supervise the work. 3 families rebuild their root cellars using it. Marta sits with a Norwegian family and draws diagrams on brown paper bags to explain the system. She buys a second thermometer for Lars. She keeps the first recording numbers in her marbled notebook. Truth written down and handed on is the only warmth that never runs out. Anna grows up. Anna marries and digs her own trench, bringing warmth up from the ground as her mother taught. Perhaps you have felt the weight of laughter. Perhaps you have almost put down the mattock. Don't. The ground holds warmth that never freezes. Marta Solberg crawls through mud for 9 days to find it. She sits on a warm floor and listens to the wind. She knows something. She digs. So can you.